The third component in the three-point light setup is a backlight, or sometimes a rim light. And these two are a little different, but basically share the same purpose. And that is to separate our subject from the background. Whereas right now, without a backlight, the upper edge of our subject is very similar in color and value to the backdrop. And so to create this backlight, I'm simply going to, again, duplicate one of our existing area lights. So Shift D. And I'm going to hit RZ to rotate it in the Z-axis along the cursor until it's behind our subject, pointing down at it. Maybe raise it up just a little bit more, something like that. And then rename this light lamp_back. And then let's see what it looks like in the rendered viewport. It's sharing the same warm color, so let's desaturate it entirely and leave it white for now. And now with this new light positioned in the back, we can see that the border of our subject is very distinct from the background. Whereas before, if I turn the lamp off and then back on, the distinction comes from two things. Number one, there is a new specular highlight on top, these two very bright spots. But then also our background is being illuminated more, which makes it higher in value than the majority of our subject. And let's see what this backlight looks like by itself, turning off the fill and the key light. Here you can really tell how much the background is being illuminated, while the subject is not being illuminated so much as it's gaining a new specular highlight on top. So the backlight can be positioned in several different ways for different effects. Let's see what it looks like when it's rotated more above the subject. Hit R and X to rotate in the X-axis around our cursor so it's more directly above the subject, and then maybe bring it down just a little bit. Let's see what that looks like rendered. And see, now we're getting both illumination in the backdrop, but also illumination on this top edge of the subject. And maybe I'll rotate this a little bit back in X. There we go, something like that. That way it's still more of a backlight instead of an overhead light. And then when we bring back our fill and key light, we now have a well-rounded lighting setup. And so now for a rim light, I'm going to hide our backdrop geometry and turn off our lamp and fill. And the purpose of a rim light is still to separate the subject from the background, but in a bolder way. And so for this, I want to rotate my light so that it's basically directly behind our subject. Let's see what that looks like rendered. We don't really see any effect. However, if I increase the size, you can see that just the very edges of our subject begins to light up. And so the larger that I make this, the fuller our rim becomes around the subject, but the intensity starts to die down. So let's increase that intensity because with a rim light, we want a very stark contrast to separate it from the background. And now if we re-enable the fill and the key light, we still have that well-rounded three-point light setup, but with this kind of rim lighting contrast, we've left very little room for the subject to blend in with the background. And so you'll remember that I turned off our backdrop geometry. And that's because it's very difficult to get a clean rim light whenever we have backdrop geometry like this. As you can see, our light is intersecting with that geometry. And so a rim light works best when we're not confined by this type of studio setup. So a lot of times you see this in character or bust renders. And so that is a foundational overview of three-point lighting. But lighting is certainly an art form, so it's largely subjective. And as an artist, you're very free to experiment with lighting and use it to tell the story that you want to tell. But mastering the three-point lighting setup is a good place to start.